Welcome to another episode of unique and unknown Bigfoot stories and sightings from past news clipping stories found around the country. Please consider liking and subscribing to keep updated on more stories like these. On a cold December evening in 2012, seasoned hunter Daniel Lyle had no idea his night would veer into the unknown. What started as a deer hunting trip at Four Rivers Conservation Area in Missouri turned into a haunting sighting of an enormous figure and inexplicable lights, creating an experience Daniel could barely believe, one that would leave him and others questioning what else might linger in the shadows of Missouri's wilderness. On December 2, 2012, Daniel Lyle was out deer hunting with his bow ready at the Four Rivers Conservation Area near Rich Hill, Missouri. In the stillness of the woods, he suddenly saw a tall figure crossing a clearing, a mere 75 feet from his stand. This wasn't a bear or any other animal he'd seen. The figure was a massive creature walking upright, with brownish-red hair, a powerful upper body, broad shoulders, and a distinct conical-shaped head. It moved with deliberate slowness, foraging as it went. As Daniel held his breath, the creature seemed to sense his presence. Turning its head, it looked directly in his direction. A shock of primal fear shot through him, and he gripped his bow tighter, preparing to defend himself if necessary. For a tense moment, the two were locked in a silent standoff. Then, the creature shifted, took large strides up a nearby hill, and vanished into the woods with a speed and ease that seemed almost unnatural. Daniel's hunting partner, stationed elsewhere, saw nothing of the encounter. Shaken, Daniel returned home and shared the experience with his parents. His father, Brian Lyle, quickly contacted his Missouri Ghost Hunter Society partner Don Overton. Together, they decided to investigate the area. 3 days later, on December 5th, Brian, Don, and the Lyle family trekked the 1.5 to 2 miles into the woods where Daniel had his encounter. As the sky darkened, they set up their investigation equipment and soon came upon a strange find: scattered piles of fawn bones, each set containing what appeared to be the remains of 10 to 12 young deer. The hunters, all familiar with the habits of local wildlife, found this unusually disturbing. Daniel pointed out a tree marking the spot where the creature had passed. Measuring the height, they estimated it to be around 8 feet tall. They then conducted a series of tests, including EMF readings, yet found no anomalies. Then, from behind them came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, breaking limbs and dragging something across the ground. They quickly scanned the area with flashlights and night vision cameras, but there was nothing visible among the trees. The sounds persisted for nearly 2 hours, keeping the team on edge. Just when the strange sounds seemed to subside, a single orb of light appeared, gliding silently from one end of a clearing to the other before shooting skyward in a flash. Soon, more lights emerged from the woods northeast of their position, flickering and moving in every direction. The lights varied from tiny points to the size of a softball held at arm's length, some darting erratically, others floating in place before vanishing and reappearing elsewhere. The family observed these lights with a mixture of awe and dread. Bright white with a slight blue tint, the lights hovered just above the treetops and crisscrossed each other, as if performing an eerie, invisible dance. Despite the cold, an unease crept over them as the sounds of coyotes howled in the distance and heavy footsteps continued in the woods. With their hands numb, they decided to call it a night, though their cameras managed to capture around 40 minutes of footage of the lights. As they made their way back to the car, a chilling scream echoed through the woods, splitting the silence. A few moments later, another scream answered from a different direction. With their gear packed away, they could only stand in silence, believing they'd heard two creatures communicating in the distance. This was just the beginning. In the days that followed, other residents in Missouri came forward with similar stories. News of Daniel's encounter began to ripple through the small Missouri town. Word traveled quickly, not just to curious neighbors, but to those attuned to tales of the strange and supernatural. On a local radio broadcast, Daniel's father, Brian, shared their experience, prompting listeners to call in with their own stories. Many had seen similar creatures, glimpsed flickering lights in the woods, or heard those same unnerving screams echoing in the night. Eager to learn more, Brian and Don invited Debbie Ziegelmeyer, a local paranormal investigator, to join them in reviewing the footage they'd captured. When they all gathered at Don's home, the room fell silent as the grainy night vision images began to play on the screen. At first, only the dense woods filled the frame, an ordinary scene distorted by the eerie green tint of night vision. Then the orbs appeared. They floated, darted, and flashed erratically across the screen, behaving like no earthly lights they could think of. As the orbs danced in silence, a new sight drew gasps from the group. A bright, distinct light appeared in the night sky, slowly moving from right to left before stopping altogether. Moments later, more lights joined it, blinking in a pattern that suggested some strange order, a formation of triangles within a massive circle. The group exchanged looks, the chill of the unknown creeping down their spines. Driven by an unshakable curiosity, Brian reached out to the Missouri Department of Conservation, hoping for a logical explanation for the piles of fawn bones they had found. But the response only deepened the mystery. No predators in the area were known to accumulate remains in such a way. As for bears, the department assured him there were no reports of large brown or black bears north of I-44, well south of where the sighting had occurred. With each new piece of evidence, Brian and Don's investigation took on an air of urgency. They scoured online forums, digging through databases of sightings and paranormal events. To their surprise, they found an unsettling number of similar reports along Missouri's Highway 71 corridor, going back decades. Some were accounts of Bigfoot-like creatures. Others mentioned orbs or strange lights. Several witnesses even described sightings of both, as though the creatures and the lights were somehow connected. And as they dug deeper, a strange theory began to take shape. It was whispered among veteran researchers and dedicated Bigfoot hunters alike. Were these creatures merely animals? Or did they share some mysterious bond with the lights in the sky? Was Bigfoot drawn to these lights, or could it be something else? The most unsettling accounts suggested a more chilling hypothesis, that Bigfoot itself was somehow linked to extraterrestrial entities. More than a few eyewitnesses had reported encounters where strange figures in the woods were accompanied by hovering lights or bizarre machines that seemed neither animal nor human. These sightings, far from comforting, led Brian and Don to believe they had only scratched the surface of a much darker truth. In a late-night interview on UNX News radio show, Brian recounted the story with grim conviction. "We went looking for Bigfoot," he said, his voice heavy. "But what we found wasn't just Bigfoot. Whatever we saw out there, it didn't belong. Not to the woods, not to our world." The following week, more reports trickled in. A hunter in Kansas City claimed to have seen a towering, hairy figure skulking around Swope Park. Another sighting came from Holt, Missouri, just days after Daniel's encounter, adding to a growing sense of dread in the area. The reports echoed each other: tall, humanoid shapes, strange lights, and always that gnawing feeling of being watched from the darkness. To this day, Daniel Lyle and his family remain haunted by what they encountered in the Four Rivers Conservation Area that winter night. They have not returned to that part of the woods, and perhaps they never will. Yet every December, as cold winds howl and coyotes cry, those who know their story can't help but look to the tree line, half expecting to see a flicker of light or a glimpse of something impossibly large disappearing into the dark Missouri woods. For Cliff Crook, hunting Bigfoot has been more than just a pastime. It's a lifelong pursuit. Since his first sighting in 1956, Crook has traversed the dense forest of Washington and Oregon, documenting, collecting, and sharing evidence of the elusive creature. From plaster molds to eerie encounters, his journey is one of steadfast determination, and even now, he believes the truth is just within reach. Deep in the untamed forests of Washington, most likely within the wild expanses of Grays Harbor County, an undisclosed number of towering, human-like creatures are said to roam. This is the scenario that Cliff Crook has been chasing since 1956. It was in that year, as a young boy growing up near Totem Lake, that Crook had his first encounter with what many call Sasquatch. Now living in Bothell, Crook's commitment to finding Bigfoot is unparalleled. Over 11 years of investigating sightings with fellow researcher Renee DeHinden from Richmond, British Columbia, whom he met at a Sasquatch meeting at Green River Community College in 1975, have made him a respected figure in Bigfoot circles. From his home, Crook runs Bigfoot Central, an unofficial clearinghouse for Bigfoot information, where he frequently receives reports and evidence of potential sightings. At any moment, he might set out for days on end to to investigate newly reported tracks or eyewitness sightings. "We're getting closer to finding physical proof," Crook says confidently. He's convinced that the plaster casts of footprints and handprints collected from areas like Walla Walla, Darrington, and the Cascades are undeniable. "I insist that I have the proof right now," he states, though he adds with a chuckle, "Most people, I guess, would need to be poked in the belly button by one of them before they'd believe it." By profession, Crook is a gardener and landscaper, a job that allows him the flexibility to pursue his true passion. Crook's evidence, now on display at the Bothell Library, includes numerous plaster molds from various sightings and photographs of what he believes to be Bigfoot. Unlike the flashy, often sensationalized UFO sightings, he explains that Sasquatch reports are scarce, rarely the product of fads or hysteria. His organization receives only 2 or 3 good reports and a handful of possibles each year, many of them from the Grays Harbor area, which he claims is prime territory for Bigfoot sightings. The reports that come to Crook are varied, including first-hand accounts and even police reports. Crook notes that officers have reached out to him directly when an unusual report surfaces. His growing collection of Bigfoot evidence has become a passion project of sorts, housed in what he calls his room full of this stuff at home, and he grins at the thought of it. Upcoming displays in the Seattle Public Library and at Ivar Hageland's Smith Tower are already in the works. Crook's very first sighting took place in 1956. Investigating strange noises in a pasture one night with a friend, their flashlight beam fell upon 2 glowing blue-green eyes hovering roughly 7 feet above the ground. As the 2 boys stared, stunned, the creature turned and disappeared into the darkness. Just a few weeks later, Crook and 3 friends experienced another disturbing encounter. Camping in the woods near his home, they had barely crawled into their sleeping bags when a dog that had joined them began growling and darted into the brush. A struggle ensued, rousing the boys just in time to see the dog hurled into the air, sailing 6 feet above the ground. Terrified, the boys ran, abandoning their campsite. From that night on, Crook's fascination with Sasquatch only grew. With each new sighting and every strange occurrence in Washington's dense forests, he was drawn further into the mystery. Now, decades later, Cliff Crook remains on Bigfoot's trail, fueled by the belief that proof of the creature is only a shadow away, just waiting to be discovered in the forests he's called home for a lifetime. Everett Pete Luther had his first brush with Bigfoot on a motorcycle ride through Washington's Blue Mountains in 1966, a sighting that would ignite a lifelong fascination with the elusive creature. But it wasn't until 1982 in the swamps of Missouri that he and his family had their most chilling experience yet, an encounter that would haunt them long after they'd left the woods. Some people are skeptical when they hear about Bigfoot. They ask, "Do you really believe in those things?" To which I respond, "With all I've read and seen, it's hard not to believe in the Bigfoot phenomenon." It was Everett Lee Pete Luther, a man whose account first opened my eyes to the mystery, who shared with me his unforgettable Bigfoot experiences. 17 years after his first sighting in Washington's Blue Mountains, I found myself listening to a story that left no doubt about his conviction. In 1966, as a young construction worker in Walla Walla, Washington, Luther's rides on his motorcycle often took him into the deep forests. One summer day along Mill Creek Road near the mouth of Tiger Creek, he discovered enormous footprints in the road, 19 inches long, 8 inches wide, with a stride of 5 feet between them. These measurements matched reports from other Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest. The sighting occurred just a year before Roger Patterson's famous Bigfoot film, and Patterson himself came to Walla Walla to inspect the tracks. Despite recent rain that had blurred the edges, Patterson felt they were genuine. Luther moved back to Missouri eventually, but his fascination with Bigfoot never faded. Then, in 1982, Luther and his family had a hair-raising encounter in southeastern Missouri that gave new life to his belief. 2 years prior, he had come across an article detailing a Bigfoot sighting near his old home in Washington, stirring old memories. But it wasn't until that trip to Missouri's St. Francis River bottoms that he would have his next personal experience. While hunting on Parker's Island near Cardwell, Missouri, Luther, his son, nephew, and brother-in-law were accompanied by his loyal hound. Suddenly, the dog caught a scent and ran off through the swampy terrain, barking wildly as it followed a trail that took it across a river bottom nearly half a mile wide through waist-deep water. The men moved along a bank, keeping the dog within earshot when they were hit by a powerful stench that almost turned their stomachs. It was an odor so foul, so alien, that it made Luther's skin crawl. Listening intently, they could tell their hound was in an unusual chase, one he seemed both unable and unwilling to end. His bark changed, shifting from determined to distressed. As they advanced, they heard strange sounds, a kind of whimpering or muffled cry that echoed through the swamp, sometimes just 50 feet away. Following the noise, Luther and his nephew waded into the swamp, reaching depths nearly to their waists. It was there that they heard a heavy rustling behind them, as if something large was approaching. Deciding it was best not to confront whatever was out there, they returned to dry land, hoping the dog would eventually give up the chase. But the hound seemed possessed, barking and baying through the night in pursuit of whatever it was. After 6 hours of relentless pursuit, Luther finally called the dog off, and they headed back to their truck, exhausted. As they reached the vehicle and loaded the hound into the back, Luther's son called out, "Somebody's crossing the road!" Both he and Luther's brother-in-law described seeing a figure that stood at least 7 feet tall, with a hunched posture, weighing what they estimated to be 300 to 400 pounds. It moved with a slow, deliberate gait, briefly pausing under the full moon before disappearing into the shadows of the forest. 2 nights later, while hunting in the same area, Luther discovered fresh tracks along the riverbank. These footprints, about 12 to 14 inches long, were oddly narrow at the heel with pointed toes. He noted the strangeness of the prints, as he knew of no animals in the area that could produce such marks. The creature, whatever it was, left deep impressions in the mud, making it impossible to ignore. Yet the story took an even stranger turn in the months following their encounter. Luther, his son, and his nephew all began experiencing mysterious health issues, shortness of breath, fatigue, and even, in the case of his brother-in-law, symptoms so severe that he was hospitalized and placed under observation for a week. Even Luther's once good-natured hound turned aggressive, lunging at anyone who came near, as if haunted by memories of that night in the swamp. When Luther shared his story, I recalled another Missouri sighting from July 7, 1972, reported by United Press International, where a 6 to 12-foot black-haired beast terrorized residents near Louisiana, Missouri. Witnesses described it as a terrible-smelling, towering figure capable of lifting cars. The description matched what Luther had encountered 200 miles south, adding fuel to speculation about a Bigfoot roaming the state. After hearing Luther's accounts and knowing of other reported sightings, I was reminded of a more recent encounter back in Walla Walla, not far from where Luther first measured those footprints in 1966. Is it possible that these creatures, seen in 2 vastly different regions, could be the same? Or at the very least, connected? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. For those who've glimpsed these creatures, or heard their eerie sounds in the dark woods, belief in Bigfoot is not a matter of faith, but a reaction to what they cannot explain. And for Everett Luther, who's come face to face with the mystery more than once, the question isn't if Bigfoot exists, but where it might be lurking next. And so, as the shadows grow longer and the forests keep their secrets, these tales of elusive encounters remind us that some mysteries may never be fully understood. From the thick woods of Washington to the swamps of Missouri, whispers of Bigfoot linger, inviting us to wonder, speculate, and perhaps believe. If you've enjoyed these stories and want to hear more unique old Bigfoot sightings and tales from the past, please consider subscribing to my channel. There are plenty more mysteries waiting in the archives, and who knows, perhaps the next story will bring us one step closer to uncovering the truth about the creature in the woods.